Hey guys, some of you might have checked out some of the videos I've done in the past. I've talked about my goal being sharing information about the game of wheelchair basketball with you guys. And a lot of the information that I've used to create a career path for myself has came from a guy named Jeremy Lade. Some of you guys know him as Opie. So he's actually taken the time to get on here and help me break down some video and do some cool things with that. So with that, I'll let him introduce himself and kind of explain to you further what we're going to do with this video series.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be taking part in Jordan's idea to add some videos. I think this is a big service to wheelchair basketball. Obviously, a great way for us to be able to give back during these challenging times. What we're going to do is put together a series of videos that talk about some general concepts that you can be using in your practices and things that you can be looking at in terms of developing your coaching philosophy. Obviously, some of the terminology that we use isn't the terminology that you have to use, but again, this is kind of a starting point for all of you to start thinking about things. It's not every single read. We understand there's a ton of reads in the offensive end. Again, these are just some general conversations we're having about some starting points to think about as you're starting to figure out what you want to do for a season or during your practice plans.
Money.
Yeah.
Money. All right. You're a superstar, huh? That's why they put us in that commercial back in the day. You remember?
Hey everyone, it's Opie and Jordy starting our first video about some offensive transition and offensive strategy that we're going to talk through some things. The first thing you notice on our board is that we have our offensive players labeled with numbers. We use this and make sure that they understand that each of these athletes have a number based on their position, whether it's on basketball side or non-basketball side, which we'll get a little bit in depth more when we get to our next video when we actually get into our offensive sets. We also do the same thing on the defensive end. We label those defensive players as having numbers. In this video series right now, we're going to leave those defensive players as having letters just for the ease of us explaining how we're going to rotate through. These videos are going to focus a little bit more on the offensive strategy of what we're looking to do. And then if we get some, good feedback and people want to see some more videos and they want to see what we're doing on the defensive end, we're happy to include some of those videos and continue to build on this video series. And this, the first video, we're going to talk about what we need to do to get into our initial set on the offensive end. What we're going to do first is our offensive players are going to be coming down in offensive transition. They're going to need to come down in a sense of urgency. That can be with a standpoint of crossing, going down the floor, coming down. But when we get into this set, when we start to get to the point where we're attacking the defense, we want to make sure that we split up the court into 5 lanes. Our first lane coming down when we send that first offensive player, which you can see Jordy has drawn the number 5, and he's going to attack baseline. And you see how that attacking baseline is going to pull that A defender out real wide and create a large gap between A and B. The second offensive player that was going to be coming down in the wide lane, which is labeled number 1 for offense, took the E defender really far baseline and then created a large gap between E and D. Now, when the number 2 and number 4 offensive players come down, they're going to spread out and try and pull the letter D and the letter B defenders and create a gap between C and D and B and C, and then create some picking angles so that the offense has an opportunity to go get some picks, which is going to force the defenders to either give up wheel position and get picked out, or it's going to force those defenders to sag underneath those picks and eventually get that defensive set inside the paint to a point where we're comfortable with an offensive half-court attack, which Jordy will draw up for us now. You can see he's going to put A and B there. We're going to put our 4 and 5 offensive players in the dive and shooter position. We're going to put our 1 and 2 offensive players in the dive and shooter position, and then we're going to balance the attack and have our number 3 offensive player occupying the free throw line. In our next video series, we're going to go through why we label these players the numbers that they are and the rules that we use, so that you can see why, so you can see how effective it is to have a short term. So when you're coaching, the players know exactly what you're talking about, and you have to spend less time explaining position, and you can spend more time explaining your expectations of those athletes in those positions. All right, for our next video, we're going to talk real quickly through why we number our offensive players in the numbers that they are. In this situation, you'll see the basketball is with offensive player number 1. We always refer to the person that has the basketball as being the number 1 guy. Now, you can talk about threats and how you want to go through that stuff. At the level that we're at, our athletes are really good at recognizing the threats. So we label our offensive players with numbers so that they know how we're going to rotate on the defensive end, and also they know our expectations on the offensive end. We always refer to the person with the basketball as number 1. And we always refer to the basketball side as what's going to be the strong side in that situation. So the number 2 offensive player is going to be the person diving for the basketball. You'll see at the free throw line, we have our offensive player labeled number 3. We always refer to that offensive player as number 3 because that's going to be the next person that we rotate through, and that's our middle spot on the offensive end. And then we always put the 4 and 5 offensive players on weak side. I only refer to it as weak side because it's non-basketball side. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't have threats on that side or they have lesser threats. That means they don't have the basketball on that side. And that helps talk through our expectations on the offensive end. So when we're coaching, we can refer to those offensive numbers based on the position that they are. Our athletes know exactly what we're referring to, and then we can talk about positions and expectations versus about talking about and explaining what position they're in on the offensive end. So it really shortens the amount of explanation that is required in a practice setting. In this video, I want to talk through a little bit behind the why of setting up the way that we do. Now, I've had offenses in the past where we haven't had just a clear-cut, really strong outside shooter, and that has changed our strategy on how we attack. In this particular situation in our half-court set, I'm going to talk through us having a really strong outside shooter. What our goal is on the offensive end is to put the defense in a position where they have to make a decision. In this situation, you see the number 1 with the basketball, the number 2 in the dive spot. And this is going to put the letter E and D defender in a position where they have to make a decision. They currently have wheel position. When we talk about wheel position, that means that their chair is in front of the offensive player and preventing them from having a clear-cut lane to the basket. When I talk about the defense having to make a decision, they have to decide if they want to allow the number 1 offensive player to shoot that wide open 12-foot outside shot. If that number 1 player shoots that at a high enough percentage and the defense decides they have to give up wheel position to take that shot away, then ultimately we have put the defense in a compromised position. Most times coaches like to jump from the high side. So in this situation, player D is going to jump and try and get inside wheel position on player number 1. If player number 1 is running that screen and roll correctly, there's not enough space between his chair and the number 2 screen spot's chair where D can get good wheel position. So what 1 is going to do when D jumps is they're going to drive baseline to ultimately create 2 lanes for number 1 and number 2 offensive players to go to the basket and ultimately put E in a position where he has to make a decision. Later in the video, we'll talk about how C has to make a decision and B has to make a decision in this situation. But in the immediate decision making, E has to decide if number 1 or number 2 is a bigger threat and which chair they want to stop from going to the basket. C is also in a position of making a decision if they want to help. B is a decision where they got a zone, but we'll get to that in our next video series. You can see that I'm running this offensive set in a situation to put the defense in a position to make a decision. If they make a decision to hold wheel position, player number 1 shoots a wide open 12-foot jump shot. If they make a decision to give up wheel position, then that puts the defense in a position where the offense has 2 players attacking 1 defender. So this is the initial set of our half court set, and we're going to build upon that as we put more videos out.
Hey guys, just want to give you guys a couple of reminders about the things that Opie was trying to talk to you about earlier in the video. We can talk about transition really quick. These first guys in transition, you want to make sure they drive with a lot of speed, right? These outside guys, and the reason they're doing that is to move these defenders. You notice when they move those defenders, it created a gap, right? It created a gap. I'll move 2 just to show you there's a gap here, right? So 2's job is actually going to be to attack that gap. So when he does, D is going to make a decision, right, to play closer and stop his chair. But if you notice, when D makes that decision, it creates another gap. 5 can do the same thing by coming down and trying to exploit this gap. B is going to come here and make a decision, right? So once we get in these spots and we create the space, the next step is going to be having good intentions about going and getting picks for each other, right? So 5 is going to come across, right, and come with good speed and a good angle to set this pick and allow 3 to roll to the basket, a nice clean look, right? But if 5 does this too slow, what can happen is C can slide underneath, and 5, when he comes to set this pick, there's no pick there, you see? Because then B slid underneath, and then they're back even. So, again, what you got to do, bring 3 back up top. C comes out, hopefully is really worried about 3. 5's going to have this angle to come set a pick. He's got to get here before C can slide underneath, and then B, 3 here is going to attack, again, with speed before B can recover and take advantage of that gap, right? See, if we don't take advantage with speed, how B can slide over and protect this, and then we have to look at different options. So it's really important to come back and be here, and once 5 comes and sets this pick, to come with a lot of speed off of that pick. Okay, so the reason why we work as 5 guys trying to get picks is so the defense will sag, right? Because we all know that the teacup starts at the 3-point line, right? So like we talked about previously, if 5 comes and tries to set this pick, what B will end up having to do is sag, right? Sag to help, and then A is ultimately going to have to do the same thing, right? And then if we look and 2 does the same thing on the other side, right, we're going to see the same things happen on the other side, right? Both sides are sagging to help. And then what we get set up in is a whole bunch of crosses, and we get put where we have a guy on the dive and a shooter behind the screen, right? And then on that offside again, we have our 5 at the dive, and our 4 behind the screen. And then we get C to sag a little bit to that free throw line, and then have our 3 and our offense sit at the free throw line, ready and engaged to be a threat. Once we get in this setup, remember that our 1 and 2 are our 1 and 2 because that's who we decided has had the ball at this time. If at any point, right, we were to swing the ball over to 4, that would be our 1 and our 2 because they're strong side, ball side, right? And the reason, in a basic setup that was talked about in the beginning of this video, your 1 is a strong shooter and your 2 is a dude that can finish layups at a strong rate for you, forcing them to have to bring the help, right? So Opie talked about D jumping as a decision, as a high jump here. What 1's going to do, right, is drive to create the space, but again, they have to have good intentions to make sure they force E to make decisions between them, the ball, and 2, the dive here, right? And then in future videos, again, I'll just remind you that we can get into more options where C can be help here to the 2, and then B is forced into decisions where he has to play kind of his own and different things like that. Hopefully you guys are super interested in what we have to say, and we can continue to create a conversation with you.